Daniel Mercer pointed at the door, in front of the entire team, and told Evan Cole to leave. Immediately, no warning, no private conversation. Just one sentence, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You're done. Pack your things." Chairs stopped moving. Keyboards went silent. Someone near the end of the table froze mid-note, pen still touching paper. Evan didn't stand up right away. He stayed in his chair, hands resting flat on the table, not shaking, not clenched, just still. Daniel kept talking like the silence needed to be filled. "We can't afford mistakes like this anymore." He clicked to the next slide. Evan's name stayed on the screen. Highlighted, underlined, a list of errors beneath it, numbers, reports, deadlines. Each one positioned like proof, each one slightly off. Evan looked at the screen for 2 seconds, then looked back at Daniel. Not angry, not confused, just focused. Because something else was already happening. Not in the room, on his phone. A draft email, already written, subject line locked, internal audit review required, attachments ready, full threads, version histories, edit logs with timestamps. Every change tied to a name. Daniel Mercer. Evan reached into his pocket. Slowly, not hiding it, not rushing, pulled out his phone, unlocked it. The screen lit up against the dark conference table. No one stopped him. No one spoke. Because they still thought this was over, that the decision had already been made. Daniel turned back toward the team. Let's move on. That was the moment. Yeah, the exact second everything split. Because Evan didn't argue, didn't defend himself, didn't even stand up. He just opened the email, scrolled once, checked the recipient list, all staff. His thumb hovered above the screen, 1 inch from changing everything. If he sent it, Daniel wouldn't be the one in control anymore. If he didn't, he would walk out exactly the way they expected. Quiet, replaceable, finished. Evan exhaled slowly, then pressed send. 3 weeks earlier, nothing about the job felt unstable. Same office, same early morning coffee line where people half joked about deadlines. Same late nights where lights stayed on longer than they should. Evan knew the rhythm. He had been part of it long enough to recognize when something was off. At first, it wasn't obvious. Just small shifts. Daniel started calling more meetings. Not the usual team updates, smaller ones, closed doors, no notes shared afterward. People walked in normal, walked out quieter, less eye contact, shorter answers. Evan noticed who got called in, and then noticed who didn't. His name stopped appearing on certain threads, not completely, just enough to miss context. A report forwarded without him. A decision made without his input. At first, it felt like timing. Then it started repeating. That was when it stopped feeling random. Late one night, an email came in from Daniel. Short, direct. "We need to revisit your numbers. No greeting, no details, just pressure." Evan opened the file again. Checked every line, everything matched, everything balanced. He didn't reply. Instead, he scrolled back through older emails. Similar tone, similar timing, always late. Always after changes had already been made somewhere else. That was the first pattern. The second one came a day later. A file he had submitted was different. Not completely. Just one column. One number shifted. Enough to raise a question. Not enough to prove anything. Evan stared at the screen longer than he should have. Then opened version history. The edit wasn't his. Timestamp, 1:43 a.m. User, Daniel Mercer. Evan leaned back in his chair. Not shocked, not yet. But something settled in. This wasn't a mistake, and whatever was happening, it wasn't going to stay small. The next morning, Daniel called him in. No email, no calendar invite. Just a message through an assistant. He wants to see you. Now. Evan walked down the hallway. Glass offices on both sides. People inside pretending to work, but watching. Daniel's door was already half open. like he'd been expecting him. Evan stepped in, closed the door behind him. Daniel didn't sit. He stayed standing behind his desk, arms folded, expression tight. This report doesn't add up. No greeting, no context, just accusation. Evan stepped closer, looked at the screen, same file, same numbers. Except they weren't. That column again shifted slightly, just enough to turn clean data into a problem. Evan didn't react right away, didn't defend himself. He just said one thing. When was this version updated? Daniel didn't answer immediately, just tapped the screen. Last night. Evan nodded slowly. Not agreeing, not accepting, just registering. Because he already knew something Daniel didn't. He had checked the history, every version, every change, every timestamp, and none of those edits came from him. Evan looked up, met Daniel's eyes. Calm, steady. I'll review it again. Daniel exhaled, like that was expected. Do that, make sure it doesn't happen again. Evan didn't respond. He just turned and walked out. Back to his desk, back to his screen. He opened the file, then opened version history, scrolled down, paused. There it was again, 1:43 a.m. user, Daniel Mercer. Evan didn't feel angry, not yet, but something else replaced it. Clarity. Because now it wasn't a question anymore, it was a pattern. And patterns don't fix themselves. After that meeting, Evan stopped treating it like a misunderstanding. He started treating it like a system. Not emotional, not personal, just methodical. He didn't confront Daniel, didn't mention the edits, didn't try to explain anything to anyone. Because explanations don't matter when the narrative is already being shaped. Instead, he changed how he worked. Every file he submitted, he saved a copy, every version. He downloaded every email he archived, not in his inbox, somewhere separate, somewhere quiet. He created a folder. No name that stood out, just numbers. Inside it, everything started to build. Email threads that didn't match the timeline. Files that changed after submission. Comments that appeared, then disappeared. At first, each piece felt small, almost meaningless on its own, but when he lined them up, they started connecting. Late-night edits, always after midnight, always subtle, always just enough to shift blame. Evan began checking timestamps before anything else, then users, then patterns, and every time, the same name appeared, Daniel Mercer. It didn't happen once or twice. It kept happening, different files, different reports, same behavior. That was when Evan stopped asking why. Because the answer didn't matter anymore. Intent didn't matter, only proof did. He leaned back in his chair one night. Office mostly empty. Lights dimmed across the floor. The quiet felt different now, not calm, focused. Evan opened the folder, scrolled through everything he had collected. Weeks of records, clean, organized, undeniable. He wasn't building a defense anymore. He was building a timeline, and timelines don't rely on opinions. They rely on sequence. Cause, effect, action. Traceable, repeatable, real. Evan closed his laptop slowly. Not relieved, not stressed, just certain, because whatever this was. It wasn't going to end with another meeting. It was going to end with exposure. The meeting invite came late, not unusual, but the timing was. End of week, late afternoon, full department. Subject line, performance review. Evan read it twice, then once more. Not because he didn't understand it, because he did, too clearly. He looked around the office. People were already checking their calendars. Some annoyed, some indifferent, no one concerned, because no one thought it involved them. Evan didn't react outwardly, didn't ask questions, didn't forward the invite, he just accepted it. Then went back to his screen. Opened the folder. The one he had been building quietly. Weeks of records, emails, version histories, edit logs, all aligned, all consistent, all pointing in one direction. He didn't scroll through everything, He already knew what was there. Instead, he opened a new window. Started writing. Subject line first. Internal audit review required. He paused. Looked at the words. Neutral. Professional, not emotional. Exactly how it needed to be. Then the body. Short. Direct. No accusations. Just facts. Attached documentation reflects discrepancies in file modifications and attribution. Review recommended. He didn't over-explain. Didn't justify. Didn't defend. Because the attachments would do that for him. He added them one by one. Full threads, version histories, timestamp logs. Each file named cleanly. Easy to follow, hard to ignore. Then came the last step. Recipients. He hovered over the field. Typed slowly, all staff. The list expanded. Dozens of names, managers, analysts, HR, everyone. Evan leaned back slightly. Read the email from top to bottom. Checked attachments again. Nothing missing, nothing unclear. This wasn't a reaction. It was a release. He didn't plan to send it, not yet. Because once it went out, there was no version of the story where things stayed quiet. No reset, no correction, only exposure. Evan saved the draft, closed the window, looked at the meeting time again. 2 hours. That was all that stood between silence and something that couldn't be contained. The room filled slowly. Chairs sliding, low voices, laptops opening, normal sounds, until they weren't. Daniel stood at the front. Already set up, screen on, one slide ready. Evan walked in last. Didn't rush, didn't look around. Just took his seat, middle of the table, no escape angle. Daniel didn't wait long. Let's begin. Click. The screen changed. One name appeared, Evan Cole. Bold, centered, under it a list, numbers, reports, deadlines. Each one marked as an issue, not questions, statements. The room shifted, not loudly, but enough. People leaned slightly, eyes narrowing, trying to understand. Evan didn't react, didn't interrupt. He let Daniel speak. We've reviewed the recent work, Daniel said, and there are repeated inconsistencies. He pointed at the screen and didn't look at Evan, like the evidence spoke for itself. This affects the entire team. That was deliberate, not just criticism, isolation. Make it bigger, make it public, make it final. A few people exchanged glances. No one spoke. Because this wasn't a discussion. It was a conclusion. Daniel stepped closer to the table, voice sharper now. We can't keep absorbing these kinds of mistakes. Silence pressed in, heavy. Evan placed both hands flat on the table, calm, grounded. Then he looked up. Not defensive, not confused, just direct. Which part? Daniel paused, just for a second. Small, but visible. Evan continued, the report you changed, or the one you reassigned. Now, the room wasn't just watching, it was listening. Really listening. Because something in the tone had shifted. This wasn't someone being cornered, this was someone. Stepping forward, Daniel straightened, recovered quickly. That's not the point. Evan held his gaze. Then what is? No one moved, no one typed. The room had stopped being a meeting and turned into something else. Evan didn't speak again. He didn't need to. The room was already holding its breath. Daniel turned back to the screen, trying to move forward, trying to close it. We're done here, he said. Let's wrap this up. That was the opening. Not loud, not dramatic. Just enough. Evan reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, placed it on the table, screen facing up. It lit the surface in a pale glow. A few people noticed. Most didn't, not yet. He unlocked it. One smooth motion, no hesitation. Opened the draft. Internal audit review required. Everything already there. Clean, organized, ready. He scrolled once. Attachments still loaded, threads, logs, history, every piece in place. He tapped the recipient field, all staff. Names filled the screen. Rows of them. People sitting in the room, people outside it. People who hadn't been invited to this meeting. He paused. Just for a second. Not because he was unsure, because he understood exactly what came next. This wasn't a reply. It wasn't a correction. It was exposure. Daniel was still talking. Voice steady, trying to regain rhythm, trying to end it on his terms. Evan didn't look up, didn't react. He lowered his thumb. Hovered over the send button. Close enough to feel the decision. Far enough to still stop. Then he exhaled. Slow, controlled, and pressed. The screen flickered. Sending. For a brief second. Nothing changed. Then the word appeared, sent. Evan locked his phone, placed it back on the table, and finally looked up, not at Daniel. At the room, because now it wasn't his moment anymore. At first, nothing happened. Daniel kept talking, voice steady, measured, like the meeting was still under control, like nothing had changed. Then a phone buzzed. Soft, almost unnoticeable. Someone near the end of the table glanced down. Quick, then back up, trying not to break the flow. Another vibration, this time closer. A screen lit up, reflected faintly on the table. Daniel didn't stop, didn't look. He was mid-sentence, trying to land his point, trying to close the room. Then a third, a fourth, buzz, buzz, buzz. Not loud, but layered, enough to be felt. People started checking. Subtle at first. A glance, a tap, eyes scanning, brows tightening. Something wasn't matching. One person leaned forward, reading faster, another stopped typing completely, hands frozen above the keyboard. The shift didn't explode. It spread, quiet, precise, like a realization moving from one person to the next. Daniel finally noticed. Just a flicker, a break in rhythm. He paused for half a second, then continued, trying to hold it together, trying to stay ahead of whatever was happening, but he was already behind because the room wasn't listening anymore, not to him. They were reading, comparing, connecting, phones angled slightly inward, screens glowing, threads opening, attachments loading, the same files, the same timestamps, the same name. Evan stayed still, hands resting on the table. No reaction. No expression. He didn't need one, because now the room was doing what he had already done. Looking, checking, seeing. And once people start verifying things for themselves, they don't go back to assumptions. Daniel's voice faded. Not because he stopped, because it no longer mattered. The meeting hadn't ended, but it wasn't his anymore. It didn't break all at once. It cracked. One voice at the far end of the table, quiet, uncertain. Wait, this doesn't match. Daniel stopped mid-sentence. Not fully, just enough to notice. Another voice followed, closer this time. These edits, they weren't his. A chair shifted. Someone leaned in toward their screen. Scrolling faster, rechecking, comparing dates, times, names, the same details, over and over. The room wasn't silent anymore, but it wasn't loud either. It was focused. Voices low, controlled, but no longer contained. Daniel finally turned, really looked, not at Evan, at the people, at their screens, at the expressions changing one by one. Confusion, then recognition, then something harder, understanding. He reached for his phone. Quick, opened the email, scrolled, faster than before, not reading, searching, for something wrong, something missing, something he could push back on. But the problem wasn't what was there, it was how clear it was. Every edit traced, every timestamp aligned, every action tied back. There was no gap to argue, no space to redirect, no version of the story that held. Someone spoke again. Not questioning, stating. This wasn't his work. Another voice. So why was he blamed? That was it, the moment the room crossed the line. From observing to deciding. Evan didn't move, didn't speak, didn't look at Daniel, because he didn't need to. The shift had already happened, and this time, it wasn't subtle. Daniel stared at his phone, scrolling, stopping, scrolling again. His expression didn't collapse. Not outwardly. He kept it tight, controlled. Like he could still manage this, like he just needed a second. The room didn't give him that. People were no longer hiding it. Screens angled openly now, conversations no longer whispers. Short, direct, focused. Daniel lifted his head, looked across the table, tried to reset the room. "There's clearly been a misunderstanding," he said. Voice steady, almost calm. Like this was still recoverable, like this could still be redirected. No one responded. Not immediately, because now they weren't listening to him. They were comparing what he said to what they were reading. And those two things didn't align. Daniel took a step forward, hands resting lightly on the table, leaning in, trying to regain authority. "We'll need to review this properly before jumping to conclusions." That was his move. Slow it down. Reframe it, push it into process, buy time. But the problem was, the process was already happening, right there, in real time. A woman near the center of the table spoke, not loudly, but clearly. "These logs are time-stamped." Another voice, and they matched the server records. Daniel's jaw tightened, barely, visible only for a second, then gone. He picked up his phone again, scrolled faster, not reading now, scanning, looking for something to hold on to, a mistake, an inconsistency, anything. But the files didn't change, the timestamps didn't move, and the name didn't disappear. Daniel Mercer, repeated, attached to every change. He exhaled slowly, set the phone down, then looked up. Not at Evan, at the room, trying to read it, trying to measure what was left. But there wasn't much, because control doesn't disappear all at once. It slips, piece by piece, and by the time you notice it's gone, it already is. No one said anything at first, not because they didn't have something to say, because they didn't need to anymore. The room had already decided. It showed in the way people sat, leaning back instead of forward, arms crossed instead of typing. Eyes no longer on Daniel, but on their screens, on the evidence, on each other, confirming, quietly. Evan stayed where he was, hands still on the table, posture unchanged, not tense, not relaxed, just steady. He wasn't watching Daniel, he wasn't watching anyone, because this part didn't require him. The shift had already moved past him. Daniel stood at the front, same position, different presence. He wasn't leading anymore, he was waiting for something, a response, a question, anything he could use, but none came, because the room wasn't looking for explanations, they were processing conclusions. A man near the corner cleared his throat, not to ask, to state, "These edits are consistent." Another voice followed, across multiple files, then another. Same pattern, same timestamps. Each sentence landed. Not loud, but heavy, layering over each other. Building something Daniel couldn't interrupt. He tried once, raised his hand slightly, started to speak. "We need to..." He didn't finish. Not because he was cut off, because no one stopped for him. That was new, and it showed, just for a second. In the way his shoulders tightened, in the way his jaw set again. Control wasn't gone, but it wasn't his anymore. Evan finally looked up. Not at Daniel, at the room. Faces he had worked with for years. People who had trusted him, then questioned him. Now, recalibrating, no apologies, no sudden support. Just adjustment. Real, measured, human. And that was enough, because this wasn't about being defended, it was about not being dismissed. The silence returned. But it wasn't the same as before. Earlier it had been pressure, now it was recognition, clear, unspoken, final, and in that silence, everything had already been decided. The meeting didn't end properly. No summary, no next steps, just movement. Chairs sliding back, laptops closing, people standing up without looking at each other. Daniel said something near the front. Short, controlled, "We'll follow up." No one responded. Not because they didn't hear him, because it didn't carry weight anymore. People filed out of the room. Not rushed, but not lingering either. Phones still in hand, eyes still scanning. Some rereading the email, others opening attachments again. Double-checking, verifying. Not trusting memory, trusting records. Evan stood up last. Not waiting for anyone, not avoiding anyone. He just moved. Picked up his phone, slipped it into his pocket, left the room. The hallway felt different, quieter than usual, but not empty. Clusters of people stood near corners. Low conversations, short sentences, no speculation. Just confirmation. It's all there. I checked the logs. Same timestamps, same account. Evan walked past them. No one stopped him, no one pulled him aside, no one asked questions. That wasn't surprising, because the answers were already in their hands. He reached his desk, sat down, opened his laptop. Not to work, just to look. Inbox filling. Notifications stacking, replies starting to come in, not emotional, not dramatic, short, direct, received, reviewing, acknowledged. Evan didn't open any of them. He didn't need to, because whatever came next was no longer a conversation. It was a process, and processes. Don't move fast, but they don't ignore facts either. Evan didn't rush. He didn't check the time right away, didn't open the replies, didn't refresh his inbox. He just sat there for a moment, hands resting near the keyboard, screen still open, notifications continuing to stack in the corner. He ignored them, because the outcome wasn't going to be in those messages. Not yet. Processes don't work like that. They move somewhere else first, behind doors, inside conversations you don't see. Evan stood up slowly, reached for his bag, zipped it halfway, then stopped. Not because he was unsure, because he was listening. The office sounded different now, lower, tighter, like everything had been pulled inward. A door opened somewhere down the hall, footsteps, measured, not rushed. 2 people. Evan turned slightly, just enough to see. HR, both of them, walking past the main floor, not looking around, not scanning, moving with purpose. They didn't stop near him, didn't ask for him, didn't even glance his way. They kept walking, straight down the corridor, toward the corner offices, toward one door in particular, Daniel's. Evan didn't follow, didn't move closer. He stayed where he was, watching from a distance. The hallway narrowed, then disappeared behind glass. HR reached the door. One of them knocked, not loudly, but firmly. A pause. Short. Then the door opened. They stepped inside, and it closed behind them. That was it. No announcement, no reaction, no visible shift, but it was enough. Because the direction had changed. Evan picked up his bag again, finished zipping it, this time without stopping. He didn't look back, didn't check the hallway again because he didn't need confirmation. Not anymore. Some things don't need to be said out loud. They show up in where people go and who they go to, and right now, they weren't coming for him. The system updated quietly, no alert, no announcement, just a change. Evan didn't see it happen. He noticed it. Small things first. A calendar refresh that didn't remove his meetings. Access to shared files still intact, nothing revoked, nothing restricted. He opened one of the internal tools. Logged in, no issue, same permissions, same access, same role, everything. Unchanged. That was the first signal. The second came a few minutes later, not from a message, from absence. Daniel's name disappeared from a shared thread, not removed, just no longer active. Someone else replied in his place, short, professional. We'll be handling this moving forward, no explanation, no detail, just a shift. Evan read it once, then closed the thread. Because he didn't need to read between the lines, it was already clear. Control had moved. Not gradually, not partially, completely. He opened the internal directory, typed Daniel's name, hit search. The result loaded, then paused, then refreshed. Title field blank, Status updated. Access pending review. Evan stared at the screen for a second longer than necessary. Not surprised, not satisfied, just registering, because this wasn't a victory moment. There was no announcement, no acknowledgement, no reversal speech, just a system correcting itself, quietly, efficiently, without emotion. Evan closed the window, leaned back slightly. The office around him continued moving. People working, talking, typing. Like nothing had changed, but everything had, and the difference wasn't loud, it was structural. The kind you don't argue with, the kind you don't undo, because once it shifts, it doesn't go back. The next morning felt normal. That was the first thing people noticed. Lights on at the same time, coffee machines humming, key cards tapping against the reader. Routine stayed intact, but something underneath it had shifted. Evan walked in a few minutes earlier than usual, not to prove anything, just to see. He passed the front desk. No one stopped him. No unusual looks. No questions. He tapped his badge, green light, door unlocked. Inside, the floor was already active. Conversations low, focused, no tension in the air, but no casual noise either. People were working, not watching, not waiting. Working. Evan moved through the aisle. Past desks that had gone quiet around him the week before, now they didn't. Someone nodded. Another gave a quick neutral glance, not friendly, not distant, just normal. And that was new. He reached his desk, set his bag down, turned on his screen. Inbox loaded, more replies, more acknowledgments. Short, consistent. We received it, we're reviewing, thank you. No one mentioned Daniel, not in emails, not in conversation. His office door was closed, lights off, no nameplate. By mid-morning, someone else was using that space. Temporary, unlabeled, just a change in occupancy. Meetings continued, projects moved forward, files reassigned. Quietly, efficiently, like the system had already absorbed the correction. Evan joined a team call later that day. Same people, same agenda. No reference to what happened, but the tone was different. Cleaner, direct, no hesitation in decisions, no second-guessing ownership. At one point, someone asked Evan for input, not cautiously, not carefully, just directly, like before, like it used to be. He answered. Brief, clear, no explanation attached, because none was needed. Justice didn't show up as a moment. It showed up as absence, no apology, no announcement, no dramatic ending. Just a correction that held. And a space that no longer had to be defended. Evan closed his laptop at the end of the day. Not relieved, not proud, just steady. Because what needed to happen had already happened. The office settled into a new rhythm, not immediately, but steadily, the kind of adjustment that doesn't announce itself. It just holds. Evan didn't track the changes anymore, didn't check who had access, didn't look for Daniel's name again, because he already knew how it would look, gone, replaced, absorbed. He focused on his work. Same reports, same deadlines, same expectations, but something underneath it had shifted. Decisions moved cleaner, communication came faster, there were no late-night corrections anymore, no unexplained edits, no gaps that needed to be questioned. Just process, straightforward, accountable. Evan noticed it in small ways. A file that stayed untouched after submission. A thread that didn't change direction overnight. A meeting that ended without tension. Nothing dramatic, but consistent, reliable. He didn't feel victorious. There was no moment where it all clicked into satisfaction. Because this wasn't about winning. It was about stability, about knowing that what you do stays yours. And for the first time in weeks, it did. Evan leaned back in his chair late one afternoon. Office quieter than usual. Sunlight cutting across the floor. He watched the screen for a moment, then looked away. Not thinking about what had happened, not replaying it, just present. Because there was nothing left to resolve. The situation had already corrected itself, and sometimes that's the only kind of ending that lasts. That night, Evan sat at home. No calls, no messages that mattered. Just quiet. Real quiet. Not the kind that feels empty, the kind that feels finished. He placed his keys on the table, set his phone down beside them. Didn't open it, didn't check anything, because whatever needed to come through already had. He walked over to his laptop, opened it. The screen lit up softly. Same folders, same files, same structure. He navigated without thinking. Clicked into the folder. The one he had built over weeks. No label, just numbers. Inside, everything was still there. Emails, logs, histories, every piece that had mattered. Every detail that had changed the outcome. He scrolled once, then stopped. Not reviewing, not double-checking, just looking. Because now, it was different. Before, it had been protection, proof, a defense waiting to be used. Now, it was something else. Finished. Evan selected the folder, paused for a second, not hesitating, just acknowledging, then pressed delete. No backup, no second copy, no reason to keep it, because the purpose had already been served. The system had corrected. The truth had held, and the outcome didn't need reinforcement. The folder disappeared. Clean. Immediate. Evan closed the laptop. Sat back. Looked around the room. Nothing had changed. Same space. Same silence. But the weight was gone. Not replaced. Removed. That was enough. Because not every fight needs recognition. Some just need resolution. And this one was already over. What would you have done? Stay quiet and walk away? Or send the email and risk everything?